Mr. Oaks?
Yes, thank you, EJ. A couple things. Actually, just read in my notes while we were sitting here today that there is a proposal by some of my colleagues in the majority on the Assembly side coming out today that would raise tax rates on some of those higher earners and put us in a position of being further more dependent as we go forward. The impact of that, I mean, in your mind, you raised the caution flag on that of saying we are more dependent today than we've ever been. Doing something like that would make us even further dependent. Additional comments, related to that.
The easiest way to describe that is, I think, it's as if you have a group of people who say, we want to rise higher and get a better view. And they climb higher and higher up a tree, and you want to climb further and further and further out on a slender limb. That's what that represents, the proposal as I understand it. It's also interesting to me that I've been here long enough that 29 years ago, a brand new Assembly Speaker opened his tenure by proposing a sweeping tax reform that featured a flat tax at a rate of 6.5%. How times change. I think the arguments for that plan actually were and remain stronger than the arguments for the plan I heard described yesterday. So, I mean, that issue could be talked about all day long, but I think that is highly problematic. That the phenomenon I talked about at the end of my testimony would be even more pronounced if that policy was enacted.
Do we have any sense on when we did, or when the legislature and the governor put forth the increase before, and we increased on the upper levels? Do we have any numbers that you're aware of whether we have today more people in that bracket, fewer people?
Oh, we have more people in that bracket.
Okay.
That tax was imposed at a very low point when it came to the incomes of high-income households, particularly because of capital gains losses, because there'd been a 20 to 30% drop in stock values. So you had a lot of people who fell below that level. As stock prices recovered, and as, frankly, federal policy and the Fed's policies followed a path that was actually meant to drive more profits to New York's financial sector, in effect, that sector recovered, the city recovered, and those incomes recovered. And that is why the taxes from that segment of the population have grown back, not as high as they were without the tax cut as a share of all income before the recession, by the way, but certainly a full recovery if you include the tax increase.
My other question relates to, you talked some about the minimum wage and its possible impact as well on certain businesses, especially businesses that may pay low wage, and a lot of small ones that are fledgling or trying. That's what the market may allow them to bear. And we know there's going to be impacts in all different sectors, but we've seen some numbers. This is more of a question, I don't know if you have research on or not. We've seen different numbers thrown around that say, if we go to this, we'll lose so many jobs.
Right.
Do we have a sense by sector numbers of jobs? In other words, I'm most concerned, I think there are some adjustments that are going to take place, obviously, in the nonprofit sector and in public schools and others. Will people hire fewer? Will we tax greater in those? The ones I'm most concerned about, very honestly, are those that are making a product or growing a product, having to sell it competitively against other states or internationally where the prices of labor may be significantly different, and their competitiveness. So I'm wondering if those sectors we are anticipating higher numbers
The short answer to your question is no on a systematic basis, but here's what your common sense can tell you. Here's an example that I've used. Across upstate New York, the regions of upstate New York, there are roughly 12,000 people in the occupation described as child care worker. The median wage for people in childcare work in the occupation childcare worker throughout upstate New York, the median in all regions is from the low nines to less than $10 an hour, or was as of 2014. The median, that means half of childcare workers make less than that. Childcare work, of course, is regulated by the state. These are workers in regulated childcare establishments. There is and can be no staffing change in a childcare setting. So that won't happen. What will happen is that in an industry that has a median wage just over $9 an hour, a forced rise of the minimum wage to $15 will result in an almost dollar for dollar increase in costs. And those costs will be borne from everybody from working class, lower income working class people, many of whom have their child care subsidized by the state, up to middle class people who struggle to pay their child care bills. That is one of those industries where it's dollar for dollar. I've been involved in discussions with industries. There is a small job shop manufacturing, a small but still thriving job shop manufacturing sector through much of upstate New York still, less so in downstate, of people who make all sorts of different things, apparel, grommets, pieces of computer equipment, things you don't think of. They make a piece of it, and they do it in relatively small quantities, and so it's labor intensive. They don't pay minimum wage, but they tend to pay $11 or $12 an hour, especially starting. Those people will tell you, and I'll get you their names, they compete with companies across the country to supply. It's not still 100% Chinese suppliers. They supply, the Defense Department, they supply other larger producers of products. They will not be able to compete with they have competitors in other states who will be able to beat them more easily on price because of this. So that's another issue. One last thing, there's trade-offs in taxes, and one was raised earlier. When you come to raising the minimum wage, for instance, fewer people are eligible for a tax refund through the Earned Income Credit. On the other hand, wages are a deductible business expense. I would ask you to ponder what happens to tax receipts when you add $20 billion in deductible business expenses. The business is still paying the wage and having to deal with that issue, and it has an impact on employment. If you want to think about trade-offs in tax revenues, there are trade-offs, on the plus as well as in the negative, as well as the plus side, unintended consequences of all sorts. So that's just the beginning of it. I could get you some names of some of these people who talked about this.
Thank you very much.